Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
You bet. We want to thank Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. And while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping, Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. And we also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a new quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects, both wild and managed, before they disappear. The magazine is full of beautiful photographs and informative articles from authors such as Dr. Marla Spivak, Dr. Mark Winston, and our very own Kim Flatham. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Traynor and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with the number 2. Hey, so everybody, today we have this is the first of what are special co-hosted interviews by 2 Million Blossoms editor, Dr. Kirsten Traynor. Kirsten will be joining us today and in upcoming episodes. More on that shortly. Welcome, Kirsten.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Kim. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you.
It's good to have you back again, Kirsten.
Oh, it's always a blast talking bees with you guys.
Oh, come on. All right. So tell us about the series of interviews you plan coming up.
Yes. So I'm reaching out to a lot of people who I think are shakers and movers in the industry. And I was very thrilled to catch up with Sarah Red Laird. Sarah Red Laird. It's a difficult last name. She is the founder of the beegirl.org organization, and she's well known for her outreach to children at the National Bee Conferences. But her interests really go far beyond that. And I wanted to speak with her about a lot of work she's been doing with farmers who run cattle on rangeland and in improving their pasture, both for the cattle and for the bees that are on the same ground. So we had a chance to discuss that in detail. And then our conversation strayed into the regenerative food movement, the slow food movement, and how buckwheat honey is being grown in certain areas.
Well, I've known Sarah for quite a while, but my experience with her has been mostly with the work she's been doing with kids. So I'm looking forward to this. There's a lot more there than meets the eye. Yes,
she is really, I would say, hit the ground running and is a very good talking point for interactions with farmers. And farmers will often resist change unless they can see examples of how it's working. And so she's hosted a lot of meetings where farmers will just come right in the door, start listening to what they have to say, and really get excited about some of these new ag techniques.
Very cool. Well, before we get in, we got more, Kirsten, and your interview with Sarah coming up. Before we get to that, though, I got to talk to you guys about it's swarm season. Last year swarms didn't start till mid-May, maybe the last part of May around here. I had swarms mid-April in rainstorms. So unbelievable. I was chasing swarms out of briars and chain link fences last night. It's funny. What, you guys experiencing the same thing?
So the earliest swarm I've ever had in Maryland was March 15th.
Oh, wow.
That was many, many years ago. But yes, I love it when they land on a chain link fence and they're, at waist height and easy to collect. It's those giant swarms 40 feet up in the air that taunt you all day long that are the problem.
Kim, you gotten them out of chain link fences, you were saying?
Yeah, there are 2 tricks to chain link fences if you have access to both sides. If you only have access to one side, you're going to get a half a swarm.
Well, I had to climb and cut through brambles to get to them, and I was only to one side. And I will admit proudly, I guess, that I thought, well, I'm perfect. And I got the box all lined up on the ground, and I gave the fence a slap because they're right in the middle of two posts. So I figured there'd be a little bit of recoil, and they just drop right down. And they overshot the box and landed on the ground, and it was just like, well, I should have seen that coming. It was a mess.
Now, the trick is not to use a box. The trick is to use a big piece of cardboard in a V shape and funnel them right down to the bottom of the fence.
Yeah, a lot of people will use a drop cloth as well and shake them onto a cloth, and then you can pick that up and funnel them in where you want.
Oh, Where were you guys last night? My goodness gracious.
Bed sheets, a flat sheet works beautifully for that. What's nice is they also tend to spread out on that sheet a little bit, and then you can often find the queen quite easily. And as soon as you have her, you will end up with every bee in the box.
Well, they camped out last night underneath and on the side of the box I put out there. And it rained all last night, and so they were not in the happiest moods this morning. But I did put the sheet out. I did put the box down. I did pick up individual pieces of the other box that they were all hanging on. I got them all in the second box today. So, anyways, fun times. I love springtime swarms.
A good friend of mine here in Arizona, she gave me a call because she had a swarm settle in her lemon tree. She is not a beekeeper, and so she was quite terrified. And I told her that they would probably move on and not take up residence. That was their bivouac spot before they moved on to a new home. And she then sent me a photo afterwards because they had started to draw a little bit of comb, and she was very concerned. I said, no, that you're fine.
The lemonade stop.
Pretty much.
All right, let's get into the interview with Sarah.
Sounds good. So this is Kirsten Traynor of 2 Million Blossoms, and I'm here with Sarah Red Laird of Bee Girls organization. She's the executive director. And Sarah, how did you first get involved with bees and beekeeping?
I guess I got involved with bees when I got stung as a little kid when I was about 2 or 3. And that's what really opened my mind to the amazing and fascinating world of bees. And I very clearly remember being stung by my first bee, and I didn't cry. I was just very, very shocked that something so little and so cute could be so incredibly overwhelmingly powerful. And I loved honey. I was completely obsessed with honey. So the whole conundrum of this bee was just really fascinating for me. And I always just kind of held an affinity for bees and held an affinity for beekeeping. And in my fantasy world growing up, I thought that maybe I would be a beekeeper. But to me, it was like something that only, I don't know, like celebrities did or something. It just seemed like so unattainable. But when I got to the University of Montana in Missoula, there was a bee lab there. Dr. Jerry Bromenshank had his own lab and then also worked at the university as well and had a lab there. So I got a part-time internship doing research with them. And then when I graduated, it was smack dab in the middle of the recession. And my degree was actually in water policy and that's really, that was my focus in college. I have a degree in resource conservation, but I wanted to be an executive director of a watershed council, but no one was hiring.
Yeah.
So they were able to keep me on at the lab, which was great. So that's how I officially started, was in research.
All right. And then, so were you managing their hives for them as well as helping out on research projects?
I was more of an assistant. So Scott Debnam is their primary beekeeper. And we had 70 hives. And so I helped him with bee chores and was just under his direction. And I had 2 of my own. He gave me one just so I could experience a beekeeper's year all by myself. Nice. And then it swarmed. So then I had 2. And then the rest all belonged to the university, and I helped with those. And then in the research side of it, I pretty much just did whatever needed to be done, whichever direction they pointed me in was what I did. So nothing original. Just I was a research assistant, so I was just helping out in any way, shape, or form that I could.
That gives you a lot of hands-on experience. And so, how did that then become the Bee Girl organization?
Yeah, well, there was 2 things that popped out of my time at the lab, and it was that I really, really love to do. And one was work with the public and work with kids. And I felt like there wasn't a big enough bridge from academia to the general public.
Right.
And I really had a really deep yearning to build my own big bridge. And also I was very interested in habitat and bee habitat conservation and nutrition and landscape conservation for bees. And that just in 2009, 2010, that wasn't really the conversation yet. And so when you were talking about nutrition, it was more about pollen patties. It wasn't really about, or things that you could put in a honeybee hive. We weren't really talking about pollen and diversity on the landscape yet. And so I couldn't find a college program that I liked, that I felt was, I could really get more experience doing either of those things, because those weren't really things yet. So I just decided to break off and start my own nonprofit and do it by myself. And it was a long and hard road, but now it's to a pretty cool place where I get to do both things full time.
Very, very exciting. And you have stayed on the focus of nutrition, from what I understand. And you're working quite closely, I believe, with some farmers to introduce more bee forage into pasture.
Yes. So in my adventures into habitat world, I just became more and more sucked into the world of farming and ranching and trying to understand, because these are the folks that, well, beekeepers are for the most part nomadic. And we also oftentimes, we don't really have a say on how, unless we own that land, we don't have a say on how the land where we put our bees is managed. And so it seemed to me that the best way forward would to be to partner with farmers and help find those win-win-win solutions for farmers and ranchers and beekeepers. And that led me to the regenerative agriculture movement, where there are a lot of farmers and ranchers already out there spraying less or spraying nothing to manage their landscape, and providing a lot more diversity on the landscape, floral diversity and plant diversity, and being extraordinarily profitable while they do it. And I just felt like this could be my niche, because when I did visit those ranches, it was always endearing, because ranchers and farmers are excited for me to come and check out their property. And they're like, oh, I have so many bees and I have so much habitat. I can't wait for you to see what I have. And I'm like, awesome, I can't wait. And then we get out there and there's like red clover and white clover and some honeybees and one species of bumblebee. And I'm like, oh man, like this isn't, to me, I am lucky enough to have, I have this really cool research project on a vernal pool restoration project. And so I get to see what plant and bee diversity really looks like a day a week for the whole year. And this is my, I think, 5th year doing it. So I have a really different perception of what plant diversity and bee diversity looks like. Yeah. and it's hundreds of, well, dozens of species of plants, and so far dozens of species of bees as well, not 2. And so I want to take that excitement and really build on it and make sure that there is bee diversity out there, and there is something to get excited about, and there is floral diversity out there for our bees, and things that produce really beneficial plants to the bees as well as cattle. I mean, there's flowers out there like sandfoin, which have a natural dewormer in them, and they're also an amazing honey plant.
Oh, fascinating.
There's certain plants that are that have tannins that are really good for livestock's digestive system, that are also extraordinarily good for bees. So there's a lot of win-wins out there for both bees and livestock.
Right. Can you explain a bit what you mean by regenerative agriculture for our listeners who are not familiar with the term?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So if you could think about it, of that root word regenerate. So it's basically using agriculture to regenerate the landscape and make it better than it was when you found it. So for the most part, the majority of our agriculture right now is degenerative. It's taking from the soil. It's not building the soil. For the most part, many of our agricultural landscapes are dead zones for microbiology in the soil. So it's really based on soil health and critters, and from bacteria and fungus up to earthworms and beyond. So providing a home and a space for them, and providing and really building soil health and building the health underneath the soil surface to provide more health and more nutrient density above the soil surface for animals and for people. And then in the meantime, too, these farms and ranches that I've been to that practice regenerative agriculture, another word that gets floated around is holistic grazing or adaptive grazing. They're like nature preserves. They're parks. They're beautiful. They're lovely, lovely, wonderful places to be. So it's because, and that's part of it too, is it's not just a regeneration of the landscape, it's also a regeneration of the communities and the people too.
Interesting. So I would imagine it requires thinking on multiple levels, and that you're not just thinking about what's blooming at the moment, but sort of what long-term impacts that plant has for the soil. So potentially a lot of deep-rooted crops you're trying to get in there as well. How does that play out with concerns about weeds for pasture farming or rangeland?
Yeah. So that's one of the beautiful parts of it. Yeah, thanks for addressing that. Is it's stacked benefits, and so that's one way that I have been able to actually come back to my water nerd self. Is if you
returning truly to your roots.
Yes, if you no pun intended. Oh, us beekeepers, we can't stay away from the puns. But if you have a healthy perennial system, then you have beautiful water infiltration and less runoff into the nearest stream and all that good stuff. So, I just got really excited about talking about water conservation. And what was the question?
About the many different layers you have to think about when you're approaching with a regenerative ag. But if to continue on the water aspect, I'm sure when you're building this type of pasture land into your system, that probably provides quite a buffer against drought years and more erratic weather patterns that we are seeing these days.
Yes, yeah, because that's one of the main things that we're battling against, right, in agriculture and beekeeping is climate change and the crazy weather that comes along with climate change, flooding and drought in particular. And there's a rancher in North Dakota named Gabe Brown, and I took a course from him, and now I'm in one of his mentee groups. And I think it was last winter, or was it the year before, where there was massive flooding in the Midwest because there was so much rain, and all of his neighbors' fields that had been heavily tilled and then no cover crop planted for the winter, the water couldn't infiltrate. And so the water was just sitting there on top of the surface going nowhere and running all that topsoil, all those nutrients were shooting straight down into the nearest waterway. Whereas in Gabe's farm, it literally looked like an island. He had aerial photos of his ranch, and it's many, many thousands of acres. So it's not just like a hobby farm. It's a huge working, profitable ranch. And it was like an island. It was totally covered in cover crops. And
must have been beautiful to see.
Yeah. And it was green and beautiful and had infiltrated all of the water that had come in. There was not a soup out there. It was just a big, beautiful green pasture compared to his neighbors, which were just like mud soup. So yeah. And so that benefits bees, right? Because in the spring, he's going to have a lush, lovely, functional landscape with flowers in it, whereas his neighbors have mud holes that they can't plant in.
Right. Do you know how widespread this is gaining in with ranchers, this type of farming?
It is definitely catching on for sure. It was interesting I am on the board of the Farmers Union, and for our policy convention this spring, I was sitting in a regenerative agriculture meeting. And when the meeting started, there was maybe about 4 people. And we had a sign up on the door. And as people walked by the sign, they didn't even really know what was happening, but they heard the conversation and they came in to the room and then they started texting their friends. And by the time that the meeting was over, it was standing room only. And so,
wow.
and these are conventional good old boy farmers and ranchers. And they were very fascinated by the idea and very interested. And I think, and one of the things that came out of that meeting was we just need more farm to farmer conversations and demonstration, because it's a total mindset shift away from your typical commodity crop hamster wheel. And so being able to see how it's done and how it's done profitably is really important. So that was an action item that came out of that meeting, is for our next convention next year, which is going to be in San Francisco, is to get out to Tomcat Ranch or Pacinas Ranch, or one of the ranches that do practice regenerative agriculture.
For
purposefully, and they have open tours and demonstration days and courses, and they're set up to do those things. So I mean, so there is interest.
I mean, I think often we sort of paint all ag with one brush stroke, but most farmers care very deeply for their land, and they want to be able to pass it on to the next generation and ensure that there's still a livelihood for their children and the ones after. But to switch topics a bit, you often partner with both farmers, brewers, chefs, and others involved in bringing good food and drink to the table. What is the best part of these collaborations?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I hate the word foodie because it makes it sound so inaccessible, but eating really delicious, good, healthy, fresh food, if you do it right, it's not more expensive, I mean, in the long term. And then there's the added costs and stuff of of unhealthy, quick food. But gosh, I love being part of the good food movement because of people I get to connect with, and because of the community that's built around good food and built around people who are very, very inspired by and very much in love with the whole system. And I love that it's such a small and enclosed system, whereas oftentimes agriculture can feel so big and like such a Goliath and so unmovable. And so being ingrained in the good food system, it's really fun to be able to see these small examples of what community agriculture looks like. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can you paint a picture? Can you describe one of these events and sort of who gets involved and what happens? And
I will do. Yeah. So one of my favorite examples is Dr. Steve Jones up at the Washington State University Bread Lab outside of Mount Vernon, Washington. So in the Skagit Valley. Yes. And he was one of the only land-grant university professors back in the 80s who said that he didn't want to grow conventional Roundup ready wheat for farmers, and he didn't want to help his farmers do that. He's an extension PhD, and he wanted to breed and grow and help farmers grow local heritage grains and diversified grains and not just one thing. And he got some extraordinarily intense threats. Losing his job was the mildest of them. And he went forward and he stuck with his integrity, and the chair of his departments really stood up for him and went to bat for him, and he kept his job. And since then, he's been able to really be a catalyst to create this really beautiful community of not only all of the PhD students who have been able to come through the Bread Lab, but also the bakers that come through that are able to create the most beautiful food and sweetest treats with whole wheat flour, and then the local infrastructure that started popping up. So now there's all of these farms in the Skagit Valley, as well as Eastern Washington, that are growing locally adapted heritage, different diversified grains. And there's now a malter, so you can get so you have someone there to malt your grains for you. And there's two different millers, local millers that I know of, that have old style stone grain mills. And then there's local brewers and local bakers and a local distillery called Westland that actually is one of the only distilleries outside of Scotland that's allowed to call their whiskey Scotch, I think. And it's because of the grains that they grow are heritage Scotland grains.
Oh,
And
fascinating.
So, yeah. And it's not like, it's less expensive than your typical bottle of Scotch that you would get from Scotland. So this isn't like a really inaccessible thing. It's people that truly love their craft and are really, really good at doing it and want to share it with as many people as possible. So, I went to the Bread Lab as a bread gathering every couple of years, and I got to go and speak about honey a couple of years ago.
Pairs perfectly with
bread
bread.
And honey really does go well together. It was really fun.
Just add in some cheese and we're all good.
Yes. Blue cheese and honey and bread. There's nothing better.
So I grew up in Europe, and the one thing I miss the most moving to the States is the bread. I grew up in Germany. They do bread extraordinarily well. And it's really nice to see this shift in the United States where you are finding these artisan bakers working with letting the breads truly develop in flavor. And so I'm very excited to hear about this.
Yeah. I got connected with him through his buckwheat studies. So he was looking at over 100 different kinds of buckwheat to start breeding and have his farmers start growing and sell to the buckwheat market, and just try and diversify the buckwheat market a bit more in the United States, because there's not a ton of buckwheat diversity here where there is a ton of buckwheat diversity out there. So I partnered up with him to find which buckwheats were the most attractive to bees and the highest diversity of bees. And so I got to go up to the lab a couple of times and do some surveys. And then I grew some of his buckwheat down here in Southern Oregon. And lucky for me, the buckwheat that seemed to be the most attractive to bees is actually being grown out by a organic farmer in Eugene, which is only about 3 hours north of me. So,
fine.
So I've been able to integrate that buckwheat into my regenerative bee pasture project, which is really cool. So it's just in it.
It's definitely an underappreciated crop in the United States. Apparently in Russia, buckwheat honey is one of the prized. They're sort of, you finally brought out the good stuff when you bring out the dark honey. Whereas in the US, we often prefer the lighter honeys.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And it also seems to be really regional, as I feel like people on the West Coast don't like buckwheat honey and people on the East Coast do. I don't know where that, maybe it's because of the European influence on the East Coast.
I think so. So anywhere you have,
love it. And out here people are like, oh, it's sour, I can't stand it. And I'm like, it's just different, but it's good.
It is really good. The smell can be a little strong, but it's a very flavorful, earthy honey, I would say, which I quite enjoy. And yes, there's a huge Eastern European influence. A lot of them really love it. Also, some of the studies out of Illinois have shown that it has the highest glucose oxidase content. And so it's a very antibacterial honey for medicinal purposes. And so I think that's also on the East Coast why there's this big passion for buckwheat honey.
Yeah, that's what when I was working on this project, I get pulled in so many directions. Well, I pull myself in a million directions because I see that there's just so many things that need to be done. But for a while, I was definitely on the train of like trying to make buckwheat honey akin to like heather honey from Scotland or Manuka honey from New Zealand. I really felt like we could really make buckwheat honey America's honey with all of the available land that we have and the available and the bees and the beekeepers and the landscapes and it's going to be an acquired taste, but it's a strong and identifiable taste. And it is. I think it's really good. So I was on this big kick for a while, and then I just kind of got distracted by my regenerative bee pasture project. And
fair enough. I would advocate. I would advocate for buckwheat honey as the American honey too. It has a lot of potential. It's also excellent as a sort of glaze for if you're into roasting meats. It's a much more flavorful.
Exactly. That's the thing I love the most about it is it's just, there's so many, the depth of flavor in buckwheat honey is so layered and there's so much more there besides just sweet. Whereas a lot of honey, you put it on a peanut butter sandwich and you're like, oh, well, there's a sweet flavor on my peanut butter sandwich. But the buckwheat honey, it really, the flavor holds its own and you can really taste that honey through the peanut butter and the bread. And the same, cooking with meats or putting it in, when you bake with it, there's a flavor that still stands up on its own, which is why I love it so much.
Right. What I have found is that as beekeepers, the longer they seem to keep bees, the more they start to appreciate those diverse honey flavors. So maybe it's just a question of education and appreciation, much like the wine and the beer industry. You need to expand your palate range.
Yeah. I wonder I had a jar of buckwheat honey for a long time, and I would always take it with me when I tabled. And it was really fascinating to get people's, there's no in between. Either people would absolutely love it or they couldn't stand it.
Yeah. So your nonprofit often focuses on engaging the next generation. How is that working out at the moment in the times of self-isolation?
Oh gosh, it's just Instagram is like all I've got right now. I have been through my work with the Farmers Union, the Northwest Farmers Union. That's kind of where my COVID farmer beekeeper advocacy has gone, is more just trying to address those, trying to help everybody get their mask on, so to say, get their mask put on before they help others, or help myself get my mask on, and really through EIDL and PPP and trying to figure out what that is. And there's a new package that was just released for farmers through the USDA, Farmers and Beekeepers. So trying to basically dissect that. And that's just to help small family farms and small family beekeeping operations be able to stay strong through the pandemic. So that's really where my kind of that attention has gone, is more, I'm working on right now. We have a fantastic and brilliant staff for the Farmers Union in Washington, D.C., and we're pulling together a Q&A session for farmers, beekeepers, fishers, anybody that's a food producer. And we're hoping to have a few staffers from the Hill as well, just to help do a little presentation on what this means for small family farmers and beekeepers, and how, if you need funds to help you through this time, how to access those. So that's really that's my community organizing has been focused really on that. And so trying to pull something together on really helping folks out policy wise. But as far as, community organization, I feel like I haven't done a great job of trying to pull folks together through happy hours or anything, but I should. That would actually be that'd be pretty fun to try and do. It'd be like, I just imagine it'd probably be like, remember Party Line from the 80s? That's what I feel like a lot of Zoom calls are. Or like Google Hangouts. It's just like everybody talks over everybody and then you just start laughing. So I don't know. I'm just like, I'm not a big fan. I'm not a huge fan of tech anyways. And so I haven't been showing up to the like group hangouts, like farmer hangouts or anything. Cause I'm like, I can't sit at my computer any longer.
Well, I think everybody's putting in more screen time than they probably want. And so the opportunity to get outside and be with your bees or interact with what's finally growing out in with the spring on is always lovely. So just for a fun question, if you had to choose a pollinator to be your avatar, even though you don't like tech, which pollinator would you choose?
Ooh. I keep coming back to honeybee, but I feel like maybe that's too basic. Oh, Apis dorsata.
Very cool choice.
Yes.
Have you ever seen them live? No. That's something I'm dreaming of. I would love to get to see the giant Asian honeybees.
No, someday, hopefully. But yes, I would be Apis dorsata. I feel like they're really cool, showy patterns that they have.
Yeah. Their wave defense behavior.
Yeah, their wave defense behavior is so cool, and I just really love that. I love that the cliff dwelling aspect. They're always looking for maybe, better
pastures.
Or just finding really super cool spaces to hang out and spend their time.
That's true.
Away from people. but they can still see them below. They're at a safe distance. Yeah, it's funny because I think people, they just assume because I'm so active on social media and I do so many talks and workshops and I'm always kind of out in the public, that I think people assume that I'm really extroverted, but I'm the opposite. I'm such a hermit.
So you are adjusting well to self-isolation.
It's really not that. I mean, it's not that different.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends in town who are like, I know you travel a lot, but I don't think you travel as much as we think you do. We think that just when you're home, you hide from us. I'm like, yeah, kind of nailed it. I like having my own special spot and out in the woods to be able to rejuvenate and to reclaim my energy. So I think that's why I like Apis dorsata.
So yeah, I can totally understand that. I think everybody needs to have their own space that they can withdraw to and reframe. And I think that's what I've always loved about keeping bees, is that when you're working a hive, you have zero time to think about anything else. All you can do is focus on what's right in front of you. And you lose all track of time. Your to-do list evaporates. So
exactly. Yeah. Before bees, I was, my favorite thing in the whole entire world was outdoor adventure sports. And I spent all of my time, I actually have a degree in outdoor recreation leadership. And there was a long time there, I thought I was going to be a guide up in Alaska for my job. That's what my dad is. So I just figured, that's what I'll do
about
too.
As isolated as you could get.
I know. So I spent all my time just, rafting and rock climbing and,
it's not a bad life.
Hiking and skiing and snowboarding and doing all the things. And I think when I found beekeeping, it was such a similar rush and such a similar that kind of losing yourself in space and time, because you have to be so incredibly present and so incredibly focused to make sure that you're not hurting the bees or hurting yourself, that you kind of, there's that bee time space. And it reminded me a lot of rock climbing or those other kind of, more extreme sports where there definitely is risk, but a lot of it's perceived. So you are safe. So there's just this really cool opportunity for self-growth. And
I agree. Plus bees take you to interesting places. I mean,
they do. Oh my gosh. I know. I have been able to see so many corners of it. Started when I first started the Bee Girl organization about 10 years ago. I came back to Southern Oregon, where I grew up part here and part up in Alaska. And my first business model was to help backyard beekeepers with their bees, because backyard beekeeping was right after colony collapse disorder, and people were really understanding how important bees were. So everybody went out and got bees, and then they realized that it was hard and they didn't know what they were doing and they were killing all their bees, which made me very sad. So I started this little nonprofit to teach classes and work with people one-on-one. And I got to just go to these far-reaching little beautiful nooks and corners and valleys of my own valley that I grew up in, that I had never seen and never even knew existed. And that was so cool. And I worked for a commercial beekeeper for a short time. So I got to go do pollination work in the pears, which was just amazing to be.
It must be beautiful.
Oh my gosh, just the pear blossoms and the rainbows and the storms coming through. And it was amazing. And then since then, getting the opportunity to travel, I was bummed that we missed you in British Columbia. We were supposed to be at that conference together.
That was a shame. I got so sick. I haven't been that sick in a long time. So
I know, but after that, I spent 5 or 6 days up in the Canadian Rockies, which was
lovely.
An hour and a half from where we were, from Prince George. So so it was so beekeeping is just, it's such an amazing opportunity to be able to travel and see the world. Unfortunately, I had a whole tour planned for Australia for next
summer
month, and that is done now, but hopefully I'll get to do it next year. So
I'm sure that will come back around. I think everybody has sort of put life on hold and is hoping to hit the resume and play button once things get back to normal. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Is there any last words of advice or suggestions you can give to beekeepers just starting out?
Oh my gosh, I have been getting a crazy amount of messages and emails and this, that, and the other from folks that are stuck at home, and so they've gotten really excited about bees and backyard chickens and gardening, which is great.
Yes.
But I really, really, really will continue to stress that you really need to, bees are hard and complicated. And there's a reason they're in the news all the time, because they're all dying. It's really challenging right now with pesticides and habitat loss and climate change and disease and varroa mites. And it really is, I really still encourage people to take an online course. There's online courses offered through Megan Milbrath is my favorite beekeeping instructor, and she's got all sorts of free online resources through University of Michigan or Michigan State University.
Michigan State.
Michigan State.
I think she's in Michigan State.
Yeah, Penn State has a bunch of great free online resources. You can take a course, or you engage with the instructor at University of Montana or Girl Next Door Honey. So take classes, spend a lot of time really understanding what you're doing. Please be on top of your varroa mites so you don't become a big problem for your whole neighborhood. People always ask me to recommend books, but I am not, when I'm off work, I just can't read books. So I don't think I've ever read a bee book. But I do read your magazine, which is amazing. So people should definitely subscribe to 2 Million Blossoms as well. It's very diverse and very, very intelligent and very well put together. So
I appreciate that. Yes. So we're trying to really broaden people's views of what sustainability and why pollinators are important. And so we try to feature a lot of different pollinators, not just honeybees. And it's definitely been exciting getting it off the ground. I hope it's long-lived, and we will keep on pushing to get the word out about it. So yes.
Yeah. Diversity is kind of my word of the decade right now. And that's just really what regenerative agriculture is built on. And I feel like your magazine just exemplifies diversity to a T. There's so much in there about so many things. And so if anybody wants to know more about all these projects, they're all on my website, which is www.beegirl.org. And everything is there in detail. I'm a pretty active blogger, so I have a lot of blogs on my website as well. And then I'm pretty active on social media. So that's a good way to connect if you want to know more about any of my programs.
Very cool. And we will be sure to put that in the credits below the podcast as well, so listeners can find you easily. I appreciate you taking the time. I hope you have a lovely spring. I hope you get lost in your hives later this week and continue enjoying the isolation with your hives.
Thank you. I will.
Take care.
Thanks, Kirsten. You too.
Lovely chatting.
Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, that was really fascinating, Kirsten. Thanks for bringing us that interview with Sarah.
Oh, you're most welcome. I really enjoy talking with Sarah. As I said at the intro, a lot of people know her as Extension for Children, but what I find so fascinating is her work on regenerative farming, where you're really using the land to serve multiple purposes at once, and integrating both ranchers with beekeeping is just, we're embracing a better use of our farmland and healing it for the next generation.
Yeah.
Jeff, not a lot unlike Jonathan Lundgren's talk that we had a while back.
I was just about ready to say that.
Yeah. I think the part that I like best, and you're right, Kirsten, I knew Sarah my experience with her has been mostly with her work with kids, but the work that she's doing with grains and brewers and beer was fantastic. What a neat thing to be involved in.
Yeah, she's quite the foodie, although she doesn't like the term foodie. And I would love to attend one of her events. She organizes with farmers in her area these farm-to-table social hours where even during this COVID crisis, they're still having the event, and they've switched it over to either pickup or dispersed picnic tables in the field yet. They don't yet know at the time that event's going to be happening what will be allowed. But I just love that she really gets people in her community excited about how things are produced, their flavors, and awakens in them a real love for things off of America's heartland.
She does a good job.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Speaking of flavors, buckwheat honey.
Yes. I personally like buckwheat honey. While I was at Appomondia, I actually picked up a jar from that large organic farm in northern Canada, Anasiet, I believe it is. And they had a Saracen buckwheat honey that was absolutely delicious. A lot of people don't like buckwheat because the smell of it can be slightly off-putting. But as I said, it's great for those robust, earthy flavors if you really want something that rolls on your tongue with more than just sweetness.
Yes, it does. We've got a fairly large Eastern European heritage population here in the Cleveland area, and there is not enough buckwheat honey produced to satisfy the demand for it here. So you either love it or you leave it on the table usually. But I'm like you; I like the taste of it. I don't like it all the time. But,
no, I wouldn't want it as my only honey. That's definitely for sure. But I like it for certain flavors.
I haven't had it in a long time, so I really don't remember much of a reaction to it one way or the other. But I do remember how thick it is. It can be very thick. Yeah, it took forever.
And it can have
for the bubble.
It can have a flavor almost like molasses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you take it the next step, and if you do the honey tasting like I've done in the past, and you roll it on your tongue and you take that deep breath, it will clear out your sinuses.
I have not tried that.
Well, what about her bee avatar?
For the Apis dorsata, the Apis dorsata are the giant honeybees of Asia. I love that they have this colony-wide defense mechanism where if they're attacked by a predator, they create this shimmering wave that really throws off any aggression. So I'm glad we don't have them in the U.S., but I do hope I get to see them someday.
Before we go, Jeff, I just wanted to mention many people have heard, many haven't, but Ann Harmon passed just recently. She wrote for me for 33 years.
Wow.
And yes, she made her last deadline, as a matter of fact, talking to her daughter, Joyce. I met her a year before I started working for the magazine, and shortly before she wrote her cookbook. So when I came to the magazine, we got in touch and we started working with her, doing some cooking with honey articles. She did that for quite a while. That evolved into more general bees and beekeeping and beekeepers and how to run a club and how to make and how to do and how to fix. And there wasn't anything that I asked her to do that she not only couldn't do or wouldn't do, but was eager to do. She was an editor's delight. There's no doubt about it. And she was a friend for over 30 years. We served on the EAS board together. She was my vice chair when I was chairman of the board. And over the years, if EAS needed something, you called Ann, and it got done, and it got done right. She's going to be missed, and I'm going to miss her a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, she really was a fixture, I would say, at every EAS event. She was always there, always had a smile, was always interested in learning, very sharp. So.
Yeah, she will be missed.
Her one, in my opinion, admirable trait above all others is she did not suffer fools gladly.
No. Yes, she would let you know if she did not approve.
Yep.
So, but I think that kind of spunk is much needed, and good on her.
Yep. It was. And I'm going to be honest, as chairman, I sometimes used that trait with my vice chairman when there was something going on that I was disapproving of, and I could mention it to her, and she would take those people to task, and I sat back and, just looked like the nice guy. So, guilty as charged, but she got the job done.
All right. Well, May she rest in peace. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcast, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. As always, we want to thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their sponsorship of this Beekeeping Today podcast. And we want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. And finally, and mostly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions or comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, Kim and Kirsten, anything else we should mention?
I think you should check out the beegirl.org website for her information on regenerative agriculture, and I'm really looking forward to continuing this series with you. I have some great interviews lined up with some phenomenal women in the industry, and I'm going to keep reaching out to others as well.
I'm looking forward to it, Kirsten. And Jeff, thanks for being here today, Kirsten, and take care. Be safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, goodbye.